Good evening all, and welcome. It's now time for two of you lovely people to win the aforementioned competition. Remember, you have to have left your Instagram or Twitter handle to win, so let's see. And the first person is Chris Copeland. Oh, but Chris, you didn't leave your handle. I'm so sorry, bro. Let's start again. The winner is Potato Pie. Great name. Alright then. Well done, Potato Pie. You win the first one. Right, let me just open a new tab real quick and we'll run the competition again. Let's see. And now we press start. Let's see who won. It's Becky Billard. Well done, Becky. So Becky and Potato Pie. Is it Potato Pie? Potato Pie. It is Potato Pie. Awesome. All right then, guys. Congratulations on winning your prize. You have 1 week to email me. The email's in the description, themortismedia@gmail.com. Look in the description right there. And thank you everyone for entering. Might as well let you all know now that we're trying to go for 4,000. So there'll be 4 winners for that one. So, you know, enter. Follow me over there and maybe you'll win something next time round. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I am a 35-year-old female, and my story takes place when I was 15, but it feels like yesterday. It was the day that would change my innocent youth forever. I am from a little village in Ireland, with a population of a few hundred. The nearest town is about 10 miles away. Growing up in rural Ireland was very idealistic. Summers were spent playing football with neighbours, or going to the lake swimming till the sun went down. I was lucky that even though the population is small and the houses far apart, my best friend's house was only down the road. So during those summer months, Mary and I were inseparable. My friend and I grew up with lots of brothers and sisters in a safe village. We were given a lot of freedom, and sometimes we were gone all day and only came back before dark. As it was the mid-90s, we had no mobiles, but our mums knew we would be okay and look out for each other. One thing we liked to do during these summers, besides going to the lake and hanging out at each other's houses, was go to town and look around the shops. The easiest way to get to town was to hitchhike, as there were no buses. Here in Ireland we call it thumbing. Hardly anyone hitches now because most households have 2 cars and parents are a lot more protective. But back in the 80s and 90s it was very common. Our parents were okay with it, but there were certain rules we had to follow. I am not entirely sure who came up with the rules, but I assume our parents did. Rule number 1, never hitch alone. You must thumb with at least 1 or 2 friends. Rule number 2, never take a lift if there are 2 or more men in the car, but 2 or more women is fine. Rule number 3, never take a lift from someone in a van. There could be more guys hiding in the back, or worse, ropes and blindfolds. Rule number 4, this was the most important rule. When a car stops to pick you up, always ask the driver where they're going first. If you tell them where you are going first, they could pretend they are going to the same place to lure you in. We were innocent but had common sense, so we followed the rules down to a T. At least, we tried to. My friend Mary and I used to hitch once a week during the summer. We would go to a town with a population of a few thousand and look around the shops, eat ice cream and hang out. When we got a ride, we had to make small talk with the driver. As 2 shy 15-year-olds, this bit sucked the most. To make it fair, we took turns sitting in the front and did most of the talking. One day, we spent a few hours in town. It was pretty uneventful, so we decided to thumb back. Around 3 p.m, we were at the usual spot that we used to hitch from, just on the outskirts of the town, where we were only waiting about 5 minutes when a car pulled up. Before we could ask where he was going, he asked us first. My friend told him, and he said he was passing through our village on the way to another one. Rule number 4 broken, but he seemed nice enough and just wanted to go home. It was my turn to sit in the front. The driver introduced himself as John, a farmer, and was super friendly. He was dressed in a worn t-shirt with holes in it. He had tattered pants and smelled of cow shit. The car was full of bits of straw and old and battered like the driver. He was about 60, had no wedding ring on, and don't ask me why I noticed these things, I just did. About halfway between town and our home village, he asked if we heard a noise. No, we replied. There it is again, sounds like a banging noise, he said. I didn't hear anything, so I just sat there quietly. Think it might be the exhaust pipe, he says. I'll have to pull it in and have a look. He pulled up on a busy road and went to have a look. I didn't hear anything, Mary said. He seems like a weirdo. Call it intuition, but even though he was super friendly and chatty, I just got a bad feeling from him. Next thing, he comes back to the driver's side and tells us the exhaust is hanging down and was hitting off the road. He says he needs us to help him tie it up. It was then I noticed he had string holding up his pants instead of a belt. I thought this was odd. Anyway, he got some string off the boot, which was the same color as his belt, and we both got out the car. He showed us the exhaust pipe hanging down and used a rag to hold it up because it was hot. My friend Mary took over holding it up while he secured it with string. They were both kneeling while I just stood back and watched. It was then that I noticed his fly was open and I could see his member. He clearly wasn't wearing any underwear. He didn't even have a belt on. So I guess I wasn't surprised, and in my head I just thought, oh man, what is going on? But I said nothing. I just stood there in shock. Mary hadn't noticed at this stage and just continued to hold the pipe. When John was standing up, he noticed his fly was open and acted shocked. Oh girls, I'm so sorry and embarrassed. I only have a safety pin holding the fly together and it must have come off. Please forgive me and get back in the car. Mary was stunned because she got a close-up of his privates, which left me to do the talking. I told him it was okay and that it was an accident, so we got back in the car. He fastened the safety pin, even though I didn't see him look for it. It was all hidden again. Back in the car, the atmosphere was very different. We both felt mortified, and he kept apologizing over and over. I looked out the passenger window and just repeated, "It's okay." Then he says something that turned my stomach. "Well, girls, you're taking it all very well. If I didn't know any better, I'd swear you liked it." Then he nudged me in the arm with his, like you would a friend. I looked at him through the corner of my eye with my face still facing the window, when I noticed his fly was undone again, and he was exposed once more. He must have noticed me looking because he says, "Oh, sorry, the safety pin keeps opening. Just don't look." Fine by me, I thought, but okay. And I continued to look out the window. He continued nudging me. "Don't be looking, don't be looking," giggling at the same time. He was doing this in a playful way, almost as if it were a hilarious joke. Mary started giggling too because she laughs when she's nervous. I knew it wasn't her fault, but I was starting to get angry. He wouldn't stop telling me to stop looking. Then he said, "Your friend is laughing. She must be enjoying the view." This made her laugh even harder. Now remember, we are both polite 15-year-olds that always respect our elders and are a little shy, so I would never speak up to an adult. The nudging in the arm and my friend laughing was all getting too much. He then asked, "Is this the first Willie you've seen?" and told me once again to stop looking. I was turning, facing the passenger window so much that I had my back to him. There's no way I could be looking. I lost my temper. I shouted at the top of my voice, "I'm not looking. Mary, stop laughing." Silence followed. He said he was sorry, that he was only joking, and that I didn't need to be so serious. I said nothing and sat there, red with temper. I should have told him to let us out. I should have told him to cover himself up, the dirty old perv. But I was in shock too, and part of me wanted to believe it was all an innocent mistake. We finally arrived at our tiny village, safe. We got out, and he said that he was sorry about the whole thing. My friend got her voice back and assured him it was okay. I said it was okay and not to worry about it, and thanked him for the lift regardless. What he said back sickened me. He looked me up and down with this creepy smile and said, "Girlies, thanks for everything," and drove off. We were left speechless. We sat down on a nearby bench to process all of this before going home. We made a deal we wouldn't tell our parents, or they'd never let us hitchhike again. My friend got her voice back and repeated, "Pervert, sicko, smelly twat. He had this planned the whole time," over and over, about 5 minutes after sitting down on the bench. Who drives by going the direction we just came from? Only pervert Farmer John, waving and smiling, while we sat, stunned. He had beeped to catch our attention. So much for passing through our village. A few months later, and the ordeal went to the back of my mind. Occasionally we would talk about Farmer John, but we made jokes about it, and we told some of our friends what happened. One day I told a friend of mine named Brid. A cousin of hers had told a very similar story. The cousin lived in another village about 20 miles in the other direction from town. She was a few years older than us. While hitchhiking home one day, the same thing happened to her and her friend. The exhaust, the safety pin, and the undone fly. It was no accident, and my worst fears were confirmed. Farmer John really had other things in mind. So to the man that reeks, has worn clothes, and uses string to hold up his pants, and enjoys exposing himself, let's not meet again. On 2 previous occasions, I had picked up a lady that was hitchhiking with her kids. The lady was a con artist, and not a very good one, who had trained her children to be part of her con, with scripted dialogue. This story happened about 2 years after I had last forced her out of my car outside a police station. On the day in question, I was driving alone. I was nearing a traffic circle in my hometown when 2 young ladies jumped in front of my car, forcing me to stop. The 2 ladies claimed that some guy had been chasing them and I needed to get them away from there. I live in South Africa, a country best known for its crime. This also happened around the same time that there was a man going around my town harassing women, and I happened to be in the same area the last attack had occurred. Overall, I didn't think twice about unlocking the car and letting them in. The 2 girls looked around the same age, with one being very slim and the other leaning towards the larger variety. The skinny one got in the front seat and the bigger one in the back. The one in front was called Jen and the one in the back Kiara. I asked them if I should drive them to the police station, but Kiara said no and asked me to drive them into town. Apparently their boyfriends would meet them there. Jen hadn't said a word since getting in. I was driving in the town's direction when the following dialogue occurred between them. "Friend, I don't want to sleep on the street tonight. I know, don't worry, God will provide a miracle. But where will that miracle come from? Maybe he's already sent it." Bear in mind, this dialogue has been translated from Afrikaans. Now, to most, this would have sounded like an obvious ploy. They'd ignore it and simply try and get the girls out. To me, though, this meant something more. You see, the moment Jen had spoken her first line, alarm bells started going off in my head. I'd heard this dialogue before. Not more or less, but the same dialogue, the exact same one. It was then I recognized her. She was the daughter of a female hitchhiker I had picked up a few years prior, who had used those exact words and had spoken it between her and her mother. I never mentioned the mother's name, but she introduced herself as Natasha. I continued driving, but cut their conversation short. So I say, "So how's Natasha?" Kiara, obviously taken back by my question. Who's Natasha? You know, Jen's mother, Natasha. Jen was completely silent again. No, she's not Jen's mother. Really? That's interesting. And don't you know her at all then? No, I mean, I know her, but we don't know her. Jen was sobbing now. Won't you please help us? We're hungry and can't afford food. I looked at Kiara and wanted to make a snarky remark, but decided that was beneath me. Kiara had now started up too and was trying to fake cry. Jen was the much better actress. Some dialogue ensued with them asking for money and me refusing. I don't remember the exact line exchange. Eventually I softened up and took them to the McDonald's drive-thru. They both ordered the most expensive meals they could see on the menu, and I paid in cash, which was a stupid mistake. As we were waiting in the drive-thru, as this is South Africa and usually does take a while, Kiara asked if she could borrow my phone to send a message to her boyfriend to say that she'll be there soon. I sighed and handed her my phone. The food eventually came and we continued driving. I was getting pretty uncomfortable and wanted to get them out my car. Then they started asking for money again and more of the same dialogue ensued. Next thing I know, Kiara was starting to seductively massage my shoulders from behind. Her voice had softened and she was now talking in a seductive tone. I pulled the car to an abrupt stop and told her, but politely and firmly, "Get your hands off me." Kiara didn't listen and started to move her hands lower down. I said, and I was cut off by Jen saying, "Listen to him, Kiara. He said no." She obliged and removed her hands. "Give me my phone back. Why do you even still have it?" She protested for a moment and handed it back quickly and looked around for my wallet. "Where's my wallet?" "We don't have your wallet. I put it right next to me. It's no longer here. Where is it?" "We didn't steal your wallet." "I'm going to count to 10. And then what? You're going to take it from us? 2 young girls alone with you in your car after we were almost just assaulted? Who's going to believe you over us?" I was silent for a few seconds, considering my options. Strangely enough, they were right. The scales were not tipped in my favor here. I told them to just get out the car. Kiara protested, but Jen quickly obliged and made Kiara follow. I sped off as quickly as I could, livid. I got home still blazing and took a while to cool off. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I took out the cell phone, went into my sent items, and the following text is what she had sent. "We have one. We're bringing him to you now. Almost there." Whatever the sender had replied, she had been smart enough to delete, but had obviously forgotten about the sent items. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd have driven them down all the way to where they'd asked me to go. I really don't want to know. Oh, and I did eventually find my wallet under the car seat. All the cash, of course, was gone. This story took place when I was 23 years old, nearly 10 years ago. I was living in upstate New York in a very rural area with my ex-boyfriend and his family. He and I used to argue quite a bit. One morning before he went to work, he and I got into a very heated argument. He was 20 years my senior, but during this particular fight, he acted majorly juvenile. He jumped out of bed, flipped the bird and yelled, "If you didn't like it so much, then why don't you go back to the Bronx?" That was all the prompting I needed. I threw on my Uggs and my winter jacket, grabbed my cigarettes, and flew out the house. I am unfortunately very impulsive and didn't think to grab my cell phone before I stormed out. I didn't drive, so my only option was to walk. I don't think at the time that I intended to walk back to the Bronx, as I was a 3-hour car ride upstate, but I just needed to go for an angry, dramatic walk. I realized once I got to the road at the entrance of the trailer park that I had no idea where anything really was around me, as I'd only lived there a few months, and at that point we really didn't go out a lot. I banked left and just walked and walked where I knew civilization was. I found myself walking alongside a very busy stretch of road, with 18-wheelers flying by, spraying me with slushy snow and soaking my shoes. I then saw my boyfriend driving out on his way to work, and he sped up as he drove past me, evidently still angry about our fight. I thought for sure he was going to turn around at some point, but he never came back. I pressed on, deciding instead to walk to my best friend's mother's house, which I knew to be in the same town. It started to snow, and I was losing momentum. I passed by a VFW, where a nondescript pickup truck was parked in the driveway. It wasn't until I passed it that I even realized the driver was in the front seat. He called out to me, "Hey honey, do you need help?" My stomach churned, realizing I would have to accept this stranger's offer. I approached his truck slowly and tried to weigh out my options. He was a clean-cut, seemingly normal older white guy with grey hair, greenish-blue eyes, and just average looking. "Are you a good or bad guy?" I blurted out, and cringed at myself for asking such a dumb question. "Ha, I'm one of the good guys. I wouldn't tell you if I were a bad guy." I ignored the bells going off in my head, and I got in the front seat with him. As we drove, I realized I had no clue where my friend's mum actually lived. I knew the name of the road she lived on, but it spanned a good distance, so it wasn't very helpful in terms of finding my destination. I asked to borrow his cell phone so I could try calling my best friend to ask her where I was going. I called her 3 times and she didn't answer, probably because she didn't recognize the number. I started to feel inexplicably hopeless. After a few minutes, he asked me where I was from and why I was out in the middle of nowhere in the snow wearing pajamas. I explained I was originally from the Bronx and that I had gotten into a fight with my boyfriend. He paused and said, "Hey, you wouldn't be interested in making a little money, would you?" I chuckled nervously and said, "Oh, no thanks. Well, I just figured since you were from the Bronx," and trailed off. Realizing at that moment I was definitely in it deep, I muttered, "Oh, sure." He eyed me up and down and laughed to himself before sneering, "Sure, sure," she says. I started to panic big time, but knew I couldn't show my fear. I scoured the scenery for a pillowy snowbank that I could land in if I leapt out of the truck, to no avail. The houses were so few and far between, I became certain this would be how I met my demise. I'll never know why, but it was at this point that he decided to ask me who I was going to see. I quickly blurted out my best friend's mum's name and her husband's full name. He instantly parked up and explained that he knew the husband and how they used to snowmobile together 20 years ago. I felt the greatest wave of relief when he explained that he knew exactly where his old buddy lived. When we finally pulled up to that big yellow house, it was like arriving at the promised land. I sheepishly asked his name, Steve. He then asked mine. I gave him a fake name, spat out "thank you," and ran out as quickly as I could from his truck to the porch. I crashed through the front door and locked it behind me. Immediately I started crying, running through the house and trying to find my friend's mum. I had awoken her from a sound sleep, but she didn't say a word upon seeing how shaken up I was. Once I knew I was safe with her, I explained everything: the fight, the fleeing, the weird guy, and his proposition. And she listened, horrified and curious at the same time. She made me promise never to do anything so reckless again, and that if I needed her, to call her. She told me she would ask her husband when he got home about this Steve guy and find out more about him. I returned to my boyfriend's later that day and got really stoned to try to forget about the events of that morning. The following day, my friend's mum called me to tell me that Steve was a dangerous person who her husband had cut off communication with years ago. The last he had heard about Steve was that he had been arrested for assaulting a woman. She then went on to point out how incredibly easy it would have been for him to hurt me and leave me just about anywhere on some lonely stretch of road, and no one would have even known where to look for me. Not to mention, I might not have even been found until the snow thawed out. So Steve, you major creep, thanks for the lift, but let's not meet again. This event happened a long time ago, when a pack of smokes and a gallon of gas were both less than $1, and it only cost a dime to use a payphone. It was a time when hitchhiking across town was okay, with the occasional warnings from the older folk that Ted Bundy may be our next ride. I was 17 at the time. I worked at a fast food joint in the valley along with two of my friends, Dottie and Jolene. We all dreamed of taking a trip together and how much fun we would have hitchhiking up the coast of California to see where we ended up. We were so naive. One day, the place we worked at got robbed, so the detective said it was most likely an inside job, and we each had to take a lie detector test. Of course we passed, but the owner fired everyone and started over. Years later we found out it was his own son. Anyway, we all got paid our 2 checks and thought we were rich. This was our opportunity. We didn't think Jolene was serious because her parents were rich and she had everything. Why would she want to leave all that while we were both staying in a French garage with nothing else to lose? But she surprised us and said she was in as well. We started out the next morning, and boy were we excited. We didn't know what we were doing or how we were getting anywhere. Nevertheless, we were having fun. All day long we were singing songs and getting rides. Pretty much it was a dream come true. The first night, we sat in a diner until morning, and we were at it again. We would take turns standing with our thumbs out while the others napped under a tree, but we'd stay close to the towns because it felt safer. Thinking back, none of this was safe. It started to get dark, and we hadn't had a ride in a while. Jolene began to miss her mum and her clean bed, but we didn't miss anything except for an umbrella because it started to rain. We didn't count on rain. We were so tired, but we just kept walking, hoping to get a ride, but it was looking pretty bleak until we saw this guy in an old truck. I got a very bad vibe from the guy, but Jolene begged us to take this ride because her feet hurt. So we did. He was just supposed to take us to the next town over. How dangerous could it be? It was a bench seat, so we all piled in. Jolene jumped in first, then Dottie, and finally me by the door. Dottie and I were so tired, as we had done most of the standing that day, and we dozed off. We must have been out a while, because when I heard Jolene make a strange sound, I cracked open my eyes and saw no streetlights, and we were going very slowly. I nudged Dottie, and we both looked over at Jolene. She's sitting straight up and stiff with tears streaming down her face, and this guy's arm was around her, holding a sharp metallic object to her neck. He was steering with his knee, and his other hand was down her pants. Just then, Dottie yelled out, "Oh my God," and it startled the man, so he straightened his arm, pinning Dottie's throat to the seat. All while this is happening, I started feeling in my backpack for my sharp pointy object, not taking my eyes off the guy. I reached over and grabbed the stick shift, slamming it in reverse. The truck made a loud, crunching sound as we all flew into the dash, and the truck hit a guardrail, so we jumped out. The guy hit his head pretty badly and he started yelling at us like it was our fault. I noticed he had a wedding ring on, and at that point, the girls were both screaming to go, but I just had to. I jumped into the back of his truck, took his little weapon, which I found laying on the seat, and embedded it right in the junk. Of course, he had tried to hit me twice while calling me names, but I showed him my bigger version of what he had, and said while I was crawling out back, "Explain that to your wife." He drove off, chugging and grinding down the road. We found ourselves in the middle of nowhere. We could hear the sound of his truck get quieter as it got further away, and Jolene fell to her knees and cried. We tried to comfort her, but we were all in shock. There was nothing but rolling hills and winding roads for miles, and it was still raining. The roads were only a little bit lit by the full moon, occasionally peeking through the clouds. I felt responsible for these two girls, and at that time, I felt helpless. We walked for a while and at one point even took turns carrying Jolene. After a while, a car passed us. I was so tired I forgot to even put my thumb out, and Dottie got mad at me for letting it pass. But it stopped not too far ahead of us and sat there for a minute while we were walking. Dottie asked what I thought he was doing. I didn't have a clue, so we approached it slowly. Jolene saw it was a man and started to walk backwards, saying, "No, no, 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 no," and I didn't blame her. We were all freaked out by the last guy. He was a nicely dressed man in a Cadillac. He asked what the heck we were doing out there in the rain, so we told him what happened, and he promised that he wasn't a creep. He told us that we could all sit together in the back and that he wouldn't mind taking us to the next town to get something warm to eat. It was our only choice, so we went with him. He ended up taking us to a coffee shop, and the waitress gave us some towels to dry off with. He seemed nice enough. He said that he was a successful music artist and wrote music for big movies. He then told me some of his work, and I knew it well, seeing that my sister was a theatre art major and practically raised me watching musicals. The phone was broken, so he told us he only lived about 45 minutes away, and he would be glad to let us use his phone and crash there for the night. Then, after breakfast, he would give us a ride wherever we needed to go. Well, I was more concerned about getting Jolene somewhere she felt safe. Remember, we were only 16 and 17, in the world for the first time. We finished up our food and got back in his car. Jolene slept on my lap as I stroked her hair, and Dottie sat wide-eyed the whole way there. We arrived at his house and were pleasantly surprised that he was telling us the truth. It was a big, beautiful 2-story mansion with a big piano and studio equipment, a film screen that played the movies he was working on, and he gave us some dry clothes of his, seeing as he was short, they almost fit us. Jolene fell asleep on the couch, and we spoke for a while. It was starting to get really late, so I asked him where we were going to sleep. He told me the top of the stairs on the left. He said we could leave our bags on the counter, and I was kind of reluctant but too tired to care. It was a medium-sized room, with one big king-size bed that was calling our names. We shut the door, and he flew up the stairs and opened it, saying, "This door must stay cracked." Weird, but whatever. Dottie got up and went to the bathroom, and when she came back, she shut the door. He instantly opened the door and says, "It needs to stay cracked." He stepped away, and Dottie got real close to me in bed and whispered in my ear, "He's standing in the hall." I asked her what she meant, and she said he's just standing in one spot, twirling his moustache, staring at our door. Just then, Jolene sat straight up, jumped out of bed, saying she was going to be sick, and ran out of the room to the bathroom. Then the door slammed shut, waiting for her to come back. We started to worry. I got up and went to the door, but it was locked. We banged on the door, but we didn't hear anything. We started to look around the room for something to open it, but the room was bare. We tried to listen to see if we heard our friend, but nothing. Now Dottie is starting to cry, and believe me, I wanted to cry too. An hour or so passes and we hear a car pull up. We can't see the car from that room. Just as soon as it came, it left. Then we heard him come up the stairs. He opened the door and said, "I said leave it open." We both bombarded him with questions as to where our friend was and what did he do to her. He just looked at us and laughed. He told us she called her mother and she picked her up and that she was pretty mad at us. He said it was funny, but that didn't explain why we were locked in there, but he said we were mistaken. The door was probably jammed, and just to try and get more sleep, and he left the room cracking the door. We were scared. Dottie and I just lay there waiting for morning. I told her the first thing to do is to get our bags and run, and then she agreed. But then he came in. He stood there looking at us. We didn't know what he was going to do, and my weapon was downstairs in my bag. He stood up on the bed and told us to move over so he could lay down. We both reluctantly moved. He took off his pants, leaving only his underwear on, and threw them across the room, plopping them down between us. He told us to get closer to him, and Dottie started to shake. All these things were going through my head, and how to get out of this, when it hit me. An old movie I watched with my sister, where there was a similar situation and the girl starts to laugh at this gangster who's coming at her, and starts to make fun of his size, so he stopped. He punched her, but she stopped. So that's what I did. I started to laugh and make fun of him. Dottie looked at me like I was insane, but it was seemingly working, so she joined in. He started to cry and say weird things, like he was a bad boy, and we were very scared. While his eyes were covered by his hands, I nodded to Dottie and we both jumped up and ran out. I slammed his door and we ran downstairs, grabbing our bags while running to the door, but it was also locked. So we ran to the back of his house and out the sliding door by the pool. We saw he was coming down the stairs and Dottie screamed, "Where did he go?" We both threw our bags over the back wall and jumped. We didn't know he lived on a steep hill, so we both rolled down almost to the street below us. Both of us were cut and scraped, but we made it to the payphone. Still having doubts, Jolene made it out alive. We called her mother. Thankfully, Jolene was home safe, but she never knew when she left to tell anyone we were in trouble. We called a friend and he came all the way out and picked us up. We never called the police because we figured he was a big shot. We didn't think anyone would believe us at that time. Besides, we couldn't find his house again even if you paid us. But one thing I will tell you, we never hitchhiked again. This happened in the late 80s. Hitchhiking was more common back then, but already in decline from when I was a lad. People used to do it all the time. Anyway, I was driving along the road listening to my tunes on the radio, when I see someone in the distance. It's a girl, no older than about 15, wearing what appears to be rags. Her clothes look so tattered, she surely looks homeless. I slow down my vehicle and unlock the car. I wait to see if she's going to come in, or at least say something, but she doesn't. So I lean over and roll down my window, tentatively, and look up at her. She's just staring at the ground. "Everything okay, miss? Do you need a ride?" She didn't say anything. So I said again, "It's quite cold out tonight. You know, I can take you to the next village if that's what you need." But again, she stood perfectly still. I was just about to pull off when I heard her move just as I was doing up my window, and she opened up the back seat and hopped in. "Where are we heading?" I asked, but she just stared down at her feet. "I'll drop you off at the next town," I said. She didn't respond. I must admit, A deep and impending sense of dread had overtaken me. There was something strange about this girl. She was just weird. There's no other way to put it. But she let off a seemingly dark aura, and it was frightening me. But as a 22-year-old guy, I was just trying to embrace bravery and be strong and not let it get to me. So I started driving. The next town over was barely a 15-minute drive, and I was heading that way, so it was in no way inconvenient for me. Just when I'm getting to Main Street do I turn around to ask if this is okay to be dropped off. She's not there. I stop the car. I look all around the back seat to see if she hasn't wedged herself behind my seat or something, but she was simply gone. I didn't know how to process this information. She was there one moment and the next she had simply vanished. So I just carried on driving and made it home in record time. Moral of the story, don't pick up hitchhikers. My friends and I, 3 teenage girls, decided to hitchhike into the large city we live near to attend a party. The first people who picked us up were pretty cool, listened to music, smoked some pot, and dropped us off on the highway to make the last leg of our journey. I got to sit up front. This creepy middle-aged man who picked us up asked if we would like to go party with him at the casino in the city. He had a room for the night and was willing to pay us $1,000 each. Immediately alarmed, we told him our friends were expecting us and that we were only 16 and not interested. He then suggested one of us could join him for a few hours and he would then drop them off for the rest of the night. No thanks, bud. Not interested. He then decides he's going to drop us off at a local coffee shop, go home, switch vehicles, pick us up, and take us to our destination. We were thinking that sounds lovely. So he did. We waited for him to pull away and caught a bus to the party. So creepy-ass John, who knew we were underage, please let's never meet again, and I'm never gonna hitchhike. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. Hitchhiking is something quite rare nowadays. I don't hear of many or any people really who still do it. When I was in New Zealand on my road trip a few years back with my wife, I remember I saw one girl. She was hitchhiking. She was going the same way we were, but the way she was positioned on the road meant that we couldn't stop, so we couldn't even pick her up. She wasn't in a good place, basically. But it's just that fear. She didn't look like a dangerous person. We probably would have taken her, to be honest. But you never know. People be creepy. So be sure to stay safe out there, guys. As always, a huge thank you to my wonderful patrons. Their names are on screen now. For your help and support. It really does mean a lot. If you are interested in becoming a patron, you can find the link in the description for a handful of cool perks and bonus stuff. Yesterday I released an exclusive classic creepypasta over there for my special patron listeners. So if you want to check it out, you know what to do. Alright then guys, well for now I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.